go live button, so that means we're waiting for the stream to fire up all across the internet, and we're going to go ahead and get started. As is usually the case, YouTube usually takes a quick minute or two before it gets going, but it looks like we're alive and well, so let's jump right into it, shall we? Hello, my friends, and welcome back to yet another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Gruler. I am a criminal defense attorney here at the R&R Law Group in the always beautiful and sunny Scottsdale, Arizona, where my team and I, over the course of many years, have represented thousands of good people facing criminal charges. And throughout our time in practice, we have seen a lot of problems with our justice system. I'm talking about misconduct involving the police. We have prosecutors behaving poorly. We have judges not particularly interested in a little thing called justice. And it all starts with the politicians, the people at the top, the ones who write the rules and pass the laws that they expect you and me to follow, but sometimes have a little bit of difficulty doing so themselves. That's why we started this show called Watching the Watchers, so that together with your help, we can shine that big, beautiful spotlight of accountability and transparency back down upon our system with the hope of finding justice. And we're grateful that you are here and with us today. We've got a lot to get into, but we're kind of going to be following the same theme. Today, of course, is the 1-year anniversary of the death of George Floyd, killed by Derek Chauvin back on May 25th, 2020. We spent a lot of time on this channel dissecting everything that went on throughout that entire incident and case, and a lot of the resulting turmoil and consequences. And so today, the nation kind of paused for a moment to remember George Floyd and everything that this country has been through as a result of this incident. So we're going to break that down. We're going to talk about what some of the reaction has been from many of our elected officials. You know, the people who are responsible for sort of running the justice system. Well, they've all had a full year to reflect, and we want to see what they have to say for themselves, because they're responsible for fixing the problems that they're upset about. And we'll see if they did anything about it. We're going to hear from Cory Book. We got Julian Castro. President Biden, in fact, met with the Floyd family. He wanted to get their perspective on justice reform. Now that they've got $27 million, they've got a lot of perspective. Ben Crump, of course, the family attorney, was out there talking to the press. And so a lot of people were having a day today, having a moment. The White House released an official statement as well, and a U.S. cable was sent out by the U.S. Secretary of State that is sort of confirming that the official position of the U.S. government is going to be in support of BLM, Black Lives Matter. We're going to go through that official U.S. cable here on the program, and we're going to read through it, and we're going to show you what it says. Then you can decide for yourself, is this an official statement from the government that they are sort of endorsing BLM ideology? Because if so, that's interesting, because some of the ideology demands that BLM actually has on their website today are questionable, and it's kind of curious that our government would be in alignment with some of those concepts. So we'll see if that shakes out the way that I think it will. Then we're going to talk about what is happening with the CEOs and all of these corporations that, if you recall last year, they were all on board with justice reform. In fact, the whole country was, until BLM got involved. Everybody really wanted to see some significant changes in this country until we started to make this a left versus right thing, which unfortunately is what this has become. But there were a lot of CEOs and there were a lot of corporations that were really piling in here going, we are all about equity and racial justice and harmony in America, since somehow we were birthed out of original sin. And the question now is, well, have they put their money where their mouth is? Did they make good on any of those pledges or any of those promises? We have an article over from the Financial Times that we're going to break down. So we've got a lot to get to. If you want to be a part of the show, you can by going over to watchingthewatchers.locals.com, which is where we have our community. And so you can ask questions. There's a live chat that's happening right now as we're broadcasting. And Miss Faith is clipping those questions, and she's going to insert them into my slide deck. So we'll get to those. And you really do support the show. It's over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. Would invite you to check that out. We also have a couple new channels that we have in the description below, including a crypto channel, which I'm having a lot of fun with. Released a new video on that channel this morning. So if you want to go check that out, the link is in the description below. I appreciate your support over there if you are interested in that topic. If not, well, stick here, because we're going to get into some news of the day. George Floyd, his anniversary of his death is today, May 25th, 2021. If you recall, 1 year ago, the entire country sort of paused as soon as we saw that image, that video, footage of Derek Chauvin with his knee on the back of George Floyd's neck. And so we spent a lot of time on this channel dissecting everything that happened, multiple angles, body cameras. We covered the trial every single day that it went on, and we analyzed the outcome of the verdict, and we're still analyzing it. We're still trying to determine what really is going to happen, because there were some, I would say, improprieties or problems that happened during the trial that, of course, Derek Chauvin is going to be contesting in his appeal when he takes his appeal and finalizes his motion, that are all post-conviction motions that we already know are coming because his defense attorney, Eric Nelson, has told us so. So a lot has been happening here, and now that a year has passed, everybody has had some time to reflect. Have we as a country evolved? Have we grown? Has anything changed? Have we emerged stronger as a result of this? And in fact, this is the very question that was being asked on a poster that was being spread around today for the remembrance ceremony of George Floyd's memorial. So apparently there's a foundation called the George Floyd Memorial Foundation, and they have a inaugural remembrance, which was scheduled for May 23rd, which was over the weekend, to today, May 25th. And they're noting that they're going to have a downtown Minneapolis rally, 4 p.m., a peaceful rally, peaceful. And it's going to be on Sunday, May 23rd. So they asked the same question that I'm asking here. 1 year, what's changed? What's changed? Because when we all saw the video that day of Derek Chauvin and George Floyd, I think the entire country was sort of disgusted by what we saw. And for a brief moment, for that glimmering second, we all maybe had some momentum to actually talk about justice reform in this country. Very excited about it. As somebody who's a criminal defense lawyer, I was thinking, wow, this is finally the moment where we're going to be able to talk about some important issues about accountability and transparency, and maybe finally a lot of these issues will come to the forefront. Well, lo and behold, we fast forward a couple months, even a couple weeks, and we turn on the news, and now we have a lot of protesters and social unrest and BLM and Antifa, and they're torching Wendy's and used tire shops and car dealerships and generally causing mayhem. And so what happened immediately after that? Well, there was more division, and this became a left versus right thing. Then BLM started sort of aligning themselves with the Democrats, and then the police started aligning themselves with the Republicans, and then that's kind of all she wrote. And now it turns into this racial division problem, and now BLM demands, as we're going to see in this show today, they're demanding that Donald Trump be convicted of a crime, and you're going, what the hell did that have to do with George Floyd or police brutality? What did Donald Trump, who passed a First Step Act, have to do with any of this stuff? And so it's turned into this political food fight, and it's just been really disappointing for somebody who wants to see actual criminal justice reform. So as we go through this, we're going to hear some reactions of our elected leaders, the people who we want to fix these problems, that we sort of entrust with solving these issues. We're going to see if they've done anything. And as we go through this segment, of course, we want to pay tribute to George Floyd, right? He was killed. The law says that he was murdered, according to the jury. Still have some questions about the presumption of innocence and the beyond a reasonable doubt and some of the impartialities and all, but those are separate and apart from the main question here. Is that we want to honor life. We want to respect the dead and remember the pain and sort of the impact that he has had on this country, one way or the other, right? The entire nation stopped to deal with this, and specifically to pay attention with the Chauvin trial. So we want to, go through this with some empathy and some respect and some reverence for George Floyd, his family, and all of the people in this country that have been touched by this loss. We also want to make sure that we're staying in touch with reality. We also, are going to call it straight here on this show and on this channel. And got to remember that George Floyd was not a saint. He wasn't Mother Teresa out there. And he's sort of being elevated to this position where there's sort of this hagiography happening, where everybody is saying that this is a sort of a symbol of the best that we have to offer of America regarding racial justice, and sort of emanating from the African American community. And I'm thinking, there are so many other incredible things that we can talk about, that we don't have to make this equivalence between everything. Okay, George Floyd, it was a tragic death, and we're sorry that he's not here, but he also wasn't a saint. Okay, and both things can be true, and we can discuss this case with empathy without having to go one way or the other. Okay, if you are sort of on the right side of the aisle on this topic, many people, they wake up and they go, George Floyd was just a drug addict, and he was a dreg of society, and he's not worthy of any consideration or any empathy at all. And anybody who throws their hands up at the police, if they get killed, so what? I don't even care about that, right? That's sort of far on that one side. And on the other side, we have this idea that George Floyd is a saint and that he's walking around like the second coming or something. And you're going, that's not right either. So if we want to be true and accurate, if we want to be at least reasonable and rational, I think we got to find something in the middle We're going to try to do that today as we go through some of these reactions. So first and foremost, from USA Today, we have, they're saying that they went around and they talked about what Floyd's death meant to them. They asked leaders from around the nation. They said that they use words like trauma, turmoil, fear, and sadness, but hope that things might be different this time, that justice might prevail. So, when I hear this type of I don't know what this means, that justice might prevail, because Derek Chauvin was convicted. That the fight for change would lead to tangible results. For some, those results include the passage of the George Floyd Act, all right, which bans chokehold and no-knock warrants and limits qualified immunity, so police officers aren't shielded from certain lawsuits. The legislation, which passed the House of Representatives in March, would also prohibit racial and religious profiling, create a national police misconduct registry that would compile complaints. All these leaders say something has to change. The mayor of Atlanta worried about her 4 black children. A human rights leader described feeling yanked out of his body. America's poet laureate said she had witnessed a public lynching. All right, so some strong language. Okay. All right, let's continue on before I get all riled up. I can't get riled up too soon. I got to pace myself. The show just started. Relax. All right, we'll get there. We have America breathed a sigh of relief coming from Julian Castro, former mayor of San Antonio, Secretary of Housing and Urban Development under Obama, and he ran for president. 1 year later, it's clear that George Floyd's murder will serve as a marker in history by which we measure our progress towards racial equality. Floyd's death helped spark the largest protest movement in our nation's history, one that inspired tens of millions of Americans to say unequivocally that Black lives matter. It's a movement led by organizers and activists carried the weight of the lives lost before Floyd, like Brown, Garner, Bland, Breonna Taylor, and a couple others. America breathed a sigh of relief as Floyd's killer, Chauvin, was convicted for murder. Yet, it was but a small measure of justice against the backdrop of nearly 1,000 lives lost to police violence in the time since his death. So you just have to, 1,000 lives lost to police violence. And I've seen this meme sort of spreading around here. And I actually got into it with somebody on Twitter about this. Somebody said, well, police violence is responsible for killing, 1,000 people. And I said, police violence? What are you talking about? You mean like did they, murder them? Violence, the way that I understand the definition, and you can look this up. There's sort of an implication that it's done without legitimacy, like it's not justified. If it's violent, that means you're sort of acting outside of proper behavior. There's sort of an unacceptableness to it. It's not normal versus justified action. Okay, self-defense is typically not violence. Technically, you are doing something that might look like violence, but you say this was violent when it was not legitimate, when it was unjustified, is sort of how I use the term. Now, technically, if you look at the definition, you can make arguments about that. So it's sort of one of those words that's right down in the middle. And, the way that I've always used it, it's when it's illegitimate. If it's legitimate, you don't call it violent. You call it, no, I punched that guy in the face. Why? Because he swung at me first. I wasn't being violent. He was being violent. I ended the violent confrontation. But I was justified by hitting him back or shooting back. It's a small sliver of nuance there, but here what they're talking about is police violence resulting in 1,000 dead or nearly 1,000 lives. So is he saying that every single one of those was like the equivalent of what happened between Chauvin and Floyd? Was every single one of those 1,000 deaths totally unjustified? Were those all a result of police violence? I mean, do we have police killing multiple people every day violently? Or are some of those justified? Are some of those actually necessary and maybe shouldn't be categorized in that same bucket of police violent deaths? So it's manipulating its persuasion to make his point, and I just think it's disingenuous. Chauvin's conviction reminded us that that despite some progress towards racial justice in the last year, we haven't made nearly enough. It was a reminder that the movement sparked by George Floyd's death is more than about just one man. It's about tearing down, here it is, the systemic racism that prevents us from achieving full equality. In fact, true justice for Floyd and other victims of police won't be realized until we reimagine public safety to protect all people equally. May we have the courage to do so. We've got over here Bernice King. She's the youngest child of Dr. Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King. She's part of the Martin Luther King Center for Nonviolent Social Change. She says, "We've got some difficult days ahead. My father, Martin Luther King Jr., made this statement on the eve before he was assassinated 53 years ago. He knew that if we did not heed his prophetic warning telling us that the clock of destiny is ticking out, now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksand of racial injustice, we would face difficult days." She says, "We encountered extremely difficult days when technology captured 9 minutes and 29 seconds. I cried and breathed a sigh of relief when Chauvin was found guilty. I know the trauma and the turmoil in the hearts and minds of many persist. It's my hope that we can elevate our strategy for true peace and conversation around who we should be as an interconnected humanity." All right, so in this critical hour, we must, by multitudes, rise to be loved, implement demands of nothing, saying nothing here. This will prevent an alternative outcome, make justice a priority. Social tensions will grow. Says absolutely nothing. But, you know, she's not a politician. She's the daughter, so you don't expect anything meaningful when you're sort of giving these generic statements, right? It's just generic statements. So here's another one from Cory Booker. We have here, he says, George Floyd was a loving father, devoted brother, someone whose smile lit up a room. George Floyd's life matters. Since I was born to be black in America, learn how to protect ourselves. In the wake of Floyd's death, we have seen a nation awaken to the reality black Americans live every day. We've seen people across the country and across the world demonstrate that changing the reality we live in is not an impossible task. It's our collective calling. Great Americans have demonstrated not just the right words, not just our voices, but action. All right, well, you're a U.S. Senator from New Jersey. So the House of Representatives has already passed the George Floyd bill. So you and your 51 other or 49 other plus Kamala Harris, you make 51. So maybe you can get some momentum on that and pass some bills. Now, Joe Biden, President Biden, met with the Floyd family today amid uncertain progress on race, written by Cleve Woodson Jr. over at the Washington Post. On Tuesday, a year, family members of the Floyd family went to go visit Biden. Psaki, press secretary at the White House, said Biden is, quote, eager to listen to their perspectives and to hear what they have to say. An unfulfilled promise looms over the meeting as progress on police reform has stagnated, including legislation bearing Floyd's name that Biden hoped would be law on the anniversary of his death, but that didn't happen. Bernice Lorden, an organizer with Tampa Dream Defenders, a group that aimed at ending police prisons, said, while I do believe that flying Floyd's family up and stuff like that, it's a nice gesture, but it's not the change that we need. She's right. She's right. It's all just a bunch of show. She says we need deep, deep shifts in how we view public safety in these cities. Martin was a black 17-year-old from Florida who was shot and killed in 2012 by a local resident. Former President Trump regularly made racially charged statements and was hostile to BLM, deriding them as violent thugs. Biden, in many ways, framed his presidential run in opposition to that, making racial equity central to his campaign. That raised hopes among civil rights leaders that he would enact far-reaching and long overdue changes. But I've been screaming about this. This guy has a record of 30 years of putting people in prison and siding with law enforcement and big bureaucracies that are set up to facilitate the entire operation of that organization for 30 years. Okay, and Kamala Harris, she's been doing it for less than that, but also substantially when she was a prosecutor and then the attorney general for California. So anybody who bought into this fake hoax that they were going to suddenly do something about justice reform, well, I'm sorry that you fell for it, but we knew that was coming. Here is a clip from, what is this? From GMA, ABC News. This looks like that guy. Here he is.
George, right here at the White House, Floyd's family, including his 7-year-old daughter, Gianna, are going to be here. At this point, the White House, you said it was private, isn't going to allow cameras inside for this meeting. Now, you'll remember this. The president, after that Chauvin verdict, spoke directly with the Floyd family. He told them he would get police reform passed. He said that this would be the first opportunity to deal with genuine systemic racism. But, George, the president then set that deadline for that to happen today. Right now, though, Congress is at a stalemate on this issue.
Yeah, there seems to be the bipartisan negotiations seem to be stalled over this whole issue of immunity for police officers.
Yeah, exactly. But the key is here, there are bipartisan talks happening. Both sides just yesterday said that they are making progress. The House did pass some sort of police reform that would include banning chokeholds, ending no-knock warrants. But the issue is in this 50-50 split Senate where Democrats need Republicans to get on board in order to pass this. There's real disagreement right now over this issue of qualified immunity. This is basically the ability to hold officers legally accountable for misconduct. I asked the White House yesterday, are they going to move forward on police reform? The press secretary secretary told me that they believe they will be able to make progress. But right now, George, this deadline is set to come and go.
Okay, Cecilia, thanks very much. We're going to have a lot more on George Floyd, the impact his murder has had on our country.
Stephanopoulos, that's that guy's name. So they obviously, we're trying, we're trying. It's those damn Republicans again. They're not letting us get anything through. It's qualified immunity, They love those police officers. Biden, when the Floyd family was there, knelt in sympathy with protesters during his first in-person campaign event during the pandemic, made history by selecting Kamala Harris. During his first joint session, he urged lawmakers to pass police reform by May 25. Obviously, today is May 25th. They didn't do that. Chauvin was found guilty of murder. He says, we're going to do a lot more to get more done. We're going to stay at it until we get it done. This is going to be the first shot at dealing with genuine systemic racism. So, all right, let's see if they can get it done. But the black community, like many other Americans, is divided on whether Biden and other national leaders have fulfilled their promise. Few dispute that Biden has elevated black Americans and other people to more prominent positions than any of his predecessors, though some note his inner circle is still largely white. Racist. He speaks regularly about structural racism, and he designed his coronavirus relief package to address racial inequities, which is actually now getting challenged. I think he just lost that, actually, in a court of a federal district court. Separate video. But a criminal justice reform bill that he passed in the House has stalled. Skeptical activists worry the energy that motivated millions to protest won't be enough to overcome the inertia of Washington. And it sort of feels like that, doesn't it? Kind of feels like the criminal justice energy has just sort of been deflated ever since Chauvin was convicted. If Chauvin would have been like maybe a split verdict, or if he would have been acquitted on all charges, well, then certainly that energy, that momentum would have been steamrolling ahead. But since they got everything that they wanted, including $27 million for the Floyd family, we've got a number of other officers that have been charged as a result of their crimes. And so sounds like things are kind of moving their direction. So maybe some of the energy is deflating out. And if that can continue to dissipate, which is all part of the strategy, then they don't have to do anything. They don't have to pass anything. Nothing changes at all. George Floyd's anniversary comes and goes. Everybody, just bring him in here, bring the family in, do a press conference, show everybody around. Oh, look, hey, this is great. That's it. Nothing gets done. Why? Because they're all politicians. They don't do anything. They just talk a lot, and they release statements, and like Cory Booker and Julian Castro, they say nothing. They're all in the government. They've been in the government for as long as I've been alive, Joe Biden and many of these people, and nothing gets done. In fact, they do the opposite. So we'll see if anything happens here. Some have been concerned for months that Biden, a moderate who was criticized during the campaign for speaking kindly of segregationist senators, who told the host of a radio show aimed at a black audience that if they selected Trump over him, then you ain't black, was ill-equipped to tackle the problems. Yeah, no kidding. But Donald Trump was the racist. Since Biden's election, rising crime in U.S. cities has made many politicians even more wary of proposals to defund the police because it's a stupid idea, a key aim of many protest movements. Since Lorendan led demonstrators in protests through the streets, the latter has voted to increase police funding by $13. Folks, the reason I get so irritated about this is because these debates and these fake attempts at trying to solve anything are just wrecking the entire movement. I mean, when every time we hit a little bit of a roadblock here, nothing gets done. And so we had all of this momentum to go one direction, and now we're just seeing people drop the ball left and right. And it's just so irritating. The reality is what we're doing right now isn't working. We need to try something different. And that's a long and hard conversation. I think people get scared when they hear defund the police because they feel like we're going to go back to some kind of wild West-like kind of life. Right. Yeah, exactly right. Defund the police movement is counterproductive. It doesn't accomplish any goals at all, and for some reason, they're still using it. A senior Biden advisor has engaged minority communities on behalf of the White House. Biden's coronavirus relief package, for example, included billions for disadvantaged farmers, about a quarter of whom are black. Says, I'm just coming from an event with black farmers where we're educating them on how to get the loans paid off. $5 billion in terms of down payment on equity in that space. Pretty sure that a federal court threw that out, though. He also cited statistics in the American Rescue Plan. They reduced black poverty and on and on. He also said that Biden and others in the administration continue to work with a bipartisan group to find common ground on police reform. Says there's no magic wand, says a former senator from Louisiana. It's hard work. Yeah, okay. It's complicated. It's time consuming. Senator Booker said the talks have been meaningful, that he and Tim have gotten an honest negotiation going, and they were trying to get a good place. We support that. We don't want a rush bill. We want a meaningful bill. Okay, so Cory Booker, Tim Scott, others, they said they're still working towards a deal. Still working through our key differences on key issues, they said. Laura Endin says she and other demonstrators never expected the government to take the lead, saying this has to come from ordinary people. She says, I'm encouraged because I see people have continued to stay in the streets, like people who have continued to be public, and more and more and more. We just need our government to catch up to where the people are. So, she's frustrated from a different perspective. I'm frustrated from a different perspective. Everybody's just kind of tired of it. Meanwhile, all of our politicians are just out there just talking. Oh, we're negotiating still. About what? Qualified immunity? Oh, that's holding up the entire bill? Everything? Okay. You sure? You can't work that out? The entire package is held up because of qualified immunity? Can you leave that part out and pass something else or show us what a framework for a bill would be? Here's Ben Crump out there in front of the press, as always.
The president and the vice president met with the family for over an hour, and they're going to tell you some things that happened in that meeting. I know the president was very personal because he got to know this family over the years, and he wanted to check on them on today of all days to see how they were doing, to reiterate that they are still doing everything to make sure that his legacy is respected, and that involves us going to meet with senators in just a few moments to continue to press forward for the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act that he says he is ready to sign any day. He said that he doesn't want to sign a bill that doesn't have substance and meaning, so he is going to be patient to make sure it's the right bill, not a rush bill. Also, the family encouraged the president to continue to meet with the civil rights leaders and advocacy groups who have been working on this for decades, like Reverend Allen, the NAACP, and the National Urban League, and many others.
All right, so, when you hear phrases like that, we want the right bill, not a rushed bill. You go, oh, that's just political BS speak, meaning that there's not going to be any bill because they don't agree on what to do. And I think both parties are in alignment on this. I don't blame the Democrats. I don't blame the Republicans. I think that they're both really, really truthfully kind of anti-justice reform. I know that the Democrats play along with this, but they don't. They know that defund the police is not a reasonable solution. And so they throw that out there to placate the far left who want to do that, knowing that really the base of the Democratic Party wants nothing to do with that. So they just kind of, float that out there, but knowing that the bread and butter of the party have no interest in defunding the police at all. And so they're not going to make a move that's going to alienate the base of their party. That would be insane. Here is the statement from Joe Biden on the first anniversary. He says, today in the Oval Office, I met with Floyd family. It's been a year since all of that, 9 minutes, 29 seconds. Yet the Floyd family, extraordinary courage. Daughter told me, Daddy changed the world. He has. His murder launched a summer of protests, civil rights eras. Last month's conviction of the police officer who murdered Floyd. Wow, didn't even use his name. Wow. Didn't even use Chauvin's name in that. So look at that. No Chauvin. To deliver real change, we must have accountability when law enforcement officers violate their oaths. Okay, so accountability, we see. We need to build lasting trust between the majority of the men and women who wear the badge honorably in the communities they serve. We must have accountability and trust in our justice system. The negotiations on the George Floyd Act are ongoing. I have strongly supported the legislation. I appreciate the good faith efforts. It's my hope they'll get a bill to my desk. We have to act. We have an inflection point. Battle for the soul of America. Oh my gosh. Tired of that phrase. This administration beats the hell out of that one. So now we know that they're going to, keep moving forward with this attempt at a bill. We'll see if anything happens. Formally, the U.S. State Department is now supporting the BLM ideology and formal cables that they're sending to different countries, nation states around the world. This article is over from Human Events. And take a look at who's over here. If you're familiar with Twitter, you probably know who Jack Posobiec is. And he went over to Human Events very recently. He announced this on Twitter, and he got an exclusive. Says that a leaked State Department memo indicates official support for the BLM agenda. And so you may be wondering what the BLM agenda is. I'm going to show you that here in a little bit in the next segment. But it is curious now that it sounds like our government is telling other governments this is the official position of the United States. A source within the Biden State Department, wishing to remain anonymous, so keep that in context, indicates that All U.S. diplomatic and consular posts are being encouraged to display shows of support for BLM on Tuesday, May 25th, the one-year anniversary of the death. The memo reads in part, I'm going to show you this, which is why, I mean, it looks official to me. The department supports the use of the term, they wrote this in there. The department supports the use of the term Black Lives Matter in messaging, content, speeches, and other diplomatic engagements with foreign audiences to advance racial equity and access to justice on May 25th and beyond. Okay, so it's not just ending today. Isn't what just a one-year anniversary in memoriam type of an event. This is in the future. Just feel free to run with that. We encourage posts to focus on the need to eliminate systemic racism and its continued impact. And do you remember what one consequence of this type of language was? Remember, we played it here on this show. Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State for the United States, had that delegation where he was meeting with the Chinese, and the Chinese came over, and so the Chinese consulate's on the other side, Anthony Blinken's on one side of the table, and Anthony Blinken reads his statement, and he's reading down. He says, the U.S. is really concerned about what you're doing with the Uyghurs up there in China and all these problems. And the Chinese consulate says, what did you just say to me? You're calling me a racist? You're calling what we're doing genocide? How about this? You just had your entire country wrecked for the entire summer because of your racism, United States, because you people don't know how to handle your own internal affairs. How about you get your house in order and deal with your racial ethnic problems before you come and throw stones at the Chinese in our house? And Anthony Blinken's like, what just happened? Okay, didn't go well, and it was a big slap in the face to the American State Department. And of course, the media didn't really emphasize that a lot, but a lot of people watched that and thought, oh God, this guy's way in over his head, because we're playing two different games. They're playing the communist world domination game. We're playing woke America, don't hurt your fifis because we don't want to offend anybody game, and it doesn't work well on the international stage. The memo now, which is coming out of Blinken's State Department, says, which is in part a woke statement on social justice. Now, this is back to Posobic's commentary, and it's a part apology for U.S. actions. Despite the documented actions of BLM protesters during the 2020 riots, despite New York Times reporting, our federal government nonetheless decided to endorse and promote with admitted Marxist root BLM people, which I think is actually a fair characterization of that. You can go and look at their own website and connect it to some sort of Marxist teachings. Now, this is a copy of the unclassified State Department memo that Posobiec posted. You can see this was dated May 22nd. This is the subject header here says, commemorating George Floyd diplomatic engagement and use of Black Lives Matter language and material. Official statement referenced an executive order that Biden passed previously. This looks like they're tagging it to where it's going. We've got, all diplomatic and consular posts collective immediately from the Secretary of State out of Washington, D.C. Here's what it says, unclassified. This is an action request. Please see paragraphs 13. Summary, May 25th marks the 1 year since the brutal murder of George Floyd. And again, 9 minutes, 29 seconds. That goes in. Anytime you're talking about George Floyd, you have to make sure there's a sentence in there of 9 minutes and 29 seconds. Otherwise, it's not a real article. 1 year later, many in the international community will honor Floyd and acknowledge the long journey that nations face. May 25th, 1 year commemoration, police brutality. January 20th is one of his first official actions. Biden signed Executive Order 13985. Doing all of this stuff. So this effort is a top priority, wants to achieve his policy objectives here by condemning and combating racism. We have the intolerance against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. We've got the White House Gender Policy Council. We have the memorandum on LGBTQI plus people around the world. We have racial equity and support for underserved communities. So now we have under paragraph 1, the department policy with respect to advancing racial equity as part of our supporting our nation's interests are as follows. They go through the whole list here, right? Partnering with like-minded nations, promoting democratic principles, combating violence and discrimination against members of racial, ethnic, or other underserved communities, building coalitions, expanding, and so on and so on. The documents below provide the talking points and press guidance on racial inequity and discrimination. They go down, they give us a list of everything that's in here, remarks by the ambassador, and on and on and on. According to U.S. Special Counsel social movement, BLM gained prominence outlined by 2020 guidance. So here what they're saying is you can actually participate in this. And so what they're doing is they're giving us some sort of official kind of legal guidance as to why this is authorized. They're saying, listen, we already talked about this in 2020. There was the Office of the Special Counsel. They wrote this. They said, hey, the Hatch Act generally allows employees to engage in BLM-related activity while on duty or in the workplace. But as described below, they're still prohibited from combining BLM activity with, quote, political activity while on duty or in the workplace, and from engaging in partisan political fundraising. So they're saying you can engage in BLM-related activity, but not combining it with political activity, which to me sounds like it's the same damn thing. What's the difference between the two? Isn't BLM-related activity also political activity? Political activity, they define as an activity directed toward the success or failure of a political party. Oh, so it's not that. Oh, but how about this? A partisan political group. So is BLM a partisan political group? Well, if you look at their website, one of their demands is that Donald Trump never run for office again and he be convicted. That sounds pretty partisan because he is the leader of a political party in the United States. This carries on guidance on BLM displays. So any BLM displays within the interior of the mission, well, they're allowed. They're at the chief of the mission's discretion. As outlined below, they may decide to hang BLM flags. Wonder if they would allow like Tea Party flags. I wonder if they would allow that, or like a MAGA flag. Would they allow a MAGA flag? Or how about a Don't Tread on Me flag? I wonder if that would be allowed there. Any external facing flagpole to any chief, so that they get to decide that. We have U.S. code that defines what to do with the flags. Action requests, posts are strongly encouraged to make, so they're talking about posts, okay? So like social media posts. Posts are strongly encouraged to make full use of department tools and resources to promote policy objectives and to advance racial equity and support for underserved communities. So you can take that to mean what you want it to mean. Posts may use the full content of their evergreen content. The department stands ready to assist posts. So I guess maybe this is post. Oh, so that's not social media posts. This will be posts like people at the different like deployments. So the people who are at these different teams, posts are strongly encouraged to make use of all the tools and the resources. So not just in social media. Now I think there was something in here I got confused about social media. But you get the point, okay? It's an official state cable. Says feel free, go ahead and use all this stuff. Talk about it however you want. Let's take a look at some questions over here from watchingthewatchers.locals.com. We have Boxy Punk Chick is in the house. Says, when I hear from BLM talk about how they're all for blacks, why do their followers have so many issues with people like Candace Owen? She is black. Kind of seems like total hypocrisy. Well, it's sort of, you have to be black plus the same ideology. It's not just skin color. You have to be, I think that's how that works, because there are a lot of very, I think they're black. I think they identify that way. Like, I don't know, Justice Thomas, for example, right? Why don't they like him all that much? Because he doesn't subscribe to their ideology. So it's more about ideology than it is about race. If you don't subscribe to look at Caitlyn Jenner. She got thrown out pretty quickly because she didn't subscribe to the ideology. Sharon Quidney says BLM and their supporters, for example, Antifa, will never be satisfied until they see their boots on the necks of all white people. They have zero interest in justice reform. They are total racist, CRT racism. They are making a martyr of George Floyd. I'm waiting for the song. Yeah, it feels like there will never be a point in which anybody says, finally, we solved this. Got it. This is working. Justice system is working. We nailed it. Nice job, America. Never going to happen. LT13 says, when is anyone going to talk about personal responsibility? No one even cares to mention trying to live an honest, non-criminal life. I have seen firsthand the effects of absent parents. Most of my students live with their grandparents. That makes a deep wound in their hearts, and the cycle of hurt people continues. Oh, it's beautiful. Hurt people, right? It's bravo. It's like you can't punish the pain out of people. If they're hurt, they're going to hurt others. Yeah, it's a good question. You know, I think that absolutely has to be part of the conversation. You know, it sounds like right now we're only talking about the police, but I think that that's not fair. They're one part of the problem because they also have to work with a society, sort of the yin and the yang. We've got two components. I think if we want a solution that represents both people, we need both parties to the table, and we need to hear from both perspectives. We have Dr. Renal MD in the House says Biden needs to get his time machine and meet with his former, less hair-plugged self, Avenger style. Specifically, as chairman of the Senate Judiciary, he crafted the legislation these people are complaining about. I know, it's so funny. It really is like amazing. So, all of these Democratic senators, Democrats in general, anybody in this country who's upset with the state of our criminal justice system, they don't realize that Joe Biden built the entire thing. And I'm not kidding. He passed a bill in 1984, passed another one in 1986, passed another one in 1988, passed another one in 1994, all of them having to do with criminal justice reform. And at one point, he said that any single bill that had anything to do with criminal justice reform that came out of Congress since 1976 had his stinking name on it. He said that. Go look that quote up. So he built the entire system, everything. Mandatory sentencing, 3 strikes rules, all of this stuff. Joe Biden. And guess who was his co-pilot in this whole thing? Kamala Harris, because as Joe Biden was passing the rules, she was enforcing the rules as prosecutor and attorney general from California. So now all of these people are sitting in the White House going, oh yeah, we hear your plight. This is just so horrendous. We're going to really institute some meaningful change now. And they're going, yeah, I know. We just met with them in the Ben Crump's out there. We just met with Biden and Kamala up there. They're really focused on this. They're not going to rush a bill. They're going to get the right bill. So just hang tight. Yeah, going back with his third of $27 million. He's doing okay, whether there's a bill or not. Sharon Quidney says, I'm so sick of the lie that Trump made racially charged remarks. During his presidency, black unemployment was at historic lows. Why can't anybody remember that the Democrats were the party of slavery and Lincoln was a Republican? Yes. I love that. We have High Desert says, Rob, what is your take on all civilian police review boards? So, I haven't seen enough of them, to be honest. I would like to see some data on this. I would like to see what the makeup is. Your question is sort of general. And so, there are some ideas that I've seen float around where you have, maybe it's a civilian police review board so that it's not, officers on the board or law enforcement officials, but maybe you have 2 prosecutors, you have 2 defense attorneys, and you have a judge. And these people volunteer for a council like this. And so you sort of take it out of the hands of law enforcement, but law enforcement is highly represented by the prosecution. They're also, this board is also represented by the defense. And you've also got, somebody who's, a neutral judge person. And so, that sort of is taking it out of the police and giving it to lawyers, essentially. So I'm not sure that that's any better, but I tell you this, I've seen a lot of civilian councils and civilian boards. I'm not sure that I would find that, better. I think that it might go the other way. Like every single cop who shows up in front of them might be skewered and eliminated and, given the death penalty. So I would like to see how it works out in practice. I'm interested in the idea and some alternative solutions. I do like the idea that it's somebody else investigating the police, not themselves, because every time they investigate themselves, it's the damnedest thing, but they find they did nothing wrong. They say, oh, no, nothing happened here. You're good. Get back out there, Joe. Go out there and enforce some justice. We have Joe Snow says cops should go back to red sedans and revolvers. No Humvees, Bearcats, federal grants for training, pre-drug war, normal human being police officers who aren't trained to believe everyone is a criminal until they're either satisfied or they're not. And they have your neck securely under their knee. That's from Joe Snow. It's sort of a return to form, go back to civilian policing rather than militaristic policing where everything is like you just, have to kick a door down in Fallujah, because we're not in Fallujah. We're in America. And in fact, I'm in Scottsdale right now. So why are they treating us like we're in Fallujah? Not currently, but you know what I'm saying. From time to time, I've represented clients that felt like they were in Fallujah for nothing that warranted being treated like they were in Fallujah. We have It's Ed says, I was born into poverty. Me too, Ed. I grew up in the same environment as my brother. I worked hard, never called off, took out student loans to go to school and get my degrees. Now I'm in the top 10%. While my brother did the opposite, and he's still, quote, in poverty. Equity states I should distribute my wealth to my brother for social justice. It's just doesn't seem right. How can anyone that has pulled themselves up by their bootstraps accept the idea of equity? I don't know, Ed. I think it's a great point. I really don't understand it, and I actually don't understand it from the other perspective. I mean, my story is much the same. Grew up extremely poor until my mom sort of, kind of got her feet under her when I was about in high school. So that entirety, my entire youth was sort of rough. And, I made do. got a scholarship, put myself through college, put myself through law school. Here we are. Now, I agree that there's something very powerful about sort of earning something for yourself, going out there saying, I got a vision, man. I'm tired of my circumstances. I'm tired of living in squalor with no money, wondering if my bill's my electricity is going to be on when I come home from law school. And that was like literally the circumstances that I was in. I was working for free for 2 years. I had no money. So I was catering on the side. Long story. The point being, there's value in that. There's value in going through that struggle. I'm extremely grateful for everything that I have. And I wake up every day with some vigor and some energy because I accomplished that. And damn it, I'm not going to let that backslide. I'm proud of everything that I made. I'm proud of what I'm doing in this world. I've got a big mission. I've got a big vision, and I want to go accomplish that. Now, would I have that if somebody just gave me everything? If somebody just said, oh, well, you know what, kid? You kind of grew up poor. You got a Down syndrome brother, single mom. You've got, disappeared father. The whole thing was kind of a mess. And now because of your plight, we're going to give you all of this. We're going to give you an education. We're going to give you this. We're going to give you that. We're going to give you all this. And what happens to those? What happens to those people? I've seen those people. I know a lot of those people because they're my colleagues out in the legal community. And I'll tell you what, a little bit of a different way that they conduct themselves in the world, a little bit of a different impact I think that they're going to leave on the world because they're sort of inwardly focused. They're focused on themselves and their own self-gratification and their own sort of puffing themselves up and making the world about them. When you have to go out there and earn it, you realize nobody's going to give you anything. You got to develop service. You got to give something to the world. You got to provide more value. And that is really the lesson in that. Not somebody who's out there, just give me everything. Give me something. I feel like I'm oppressed. Get out there, make something of yourself, and live with the rewards for the rest of your life. So when we talk about this concept of this rebalancing of equity, I understand that not everybody starts at the same starting line. I get that. And I want people to have all of the opportunity in the world. But that comes from removing obstacles, not from putting weights on the shoulders of people who are more successful in society. And it really breaks my heart that there are a lot of people who are being raised up in America today that don't understand this concept, and they're not being taught it, and nobody is preaching about it the way that they should be, because they are going to lose out on one of the most beautiful things about being an American and being alive in this day and age, and it just is a sad thing. Thank you, Ed, for that great comment. We have another one from It's Ed says, Thomas Sowell stated, based on statistical analysis, the greatest harm to the black community was the destruction of the nuclear family. BLM demands the destruction of the nuclear family according to their own manifesto, which oddly aligns with Marx's and Engels' ideologies. Doesn't seem like BLM really cares about the black community. Well, I actually agree with that. We have Dr. Renal MD said, did a lawyer prepare that guidance memo? They behave as if BLM is a concept, which it literally can be, but then it refers to it as an organization. Seems on point, a violation of the Hatch Act specifically, if BLM endorses candidates. Well, BLM on their own website, they say that they want sort of the removal of a certain political party on their website. We have the list here in the next segment. We have It's Ed says 607 black people were murdered in Chicago in the last 365 days. Where's BLM for that? Is IA part of the police union? If so, how is that not a conflict of interest? So, it is, but it kind of isn't. It's sort of under the same umbrella. I think it depends on what city you're talking about. But yeah, they're sort of considered to be within the same entity. That's why when we talk about civilian or sort of external party review boards, we're pulling it out of anything that has to do with law enforcement. It is a conflict of interest. That's the problem. That's why so many people are upset about it and why it needs to change. Great questions. Really appreciate all the love and the support over from watching thewatchers.locals.com. And so we're going to continue on with the same conversation. Black Lives Matter is still in the news. Today, of course, is the anniversary of the George Floyd death. We just talked about that in the last segment, and we were sort of transitioning into a conversation about BLM and what are they doing? What do they want in this country? And are they being effective in their quest for justice reform? I think the answer is no. I think it's actually been a large failure for the justice reform movement in its entirety because we had a lot of momentum. We wanted some real meaningful change. A year has gone by and nothing has been accomplished. Now, the Democrats themselves, who have typically been in alignment with BLM, we're starting to see this rift develop. BLM now unhappy with what they're seeing from the Democrats, which were the same people that promised them everything this last election. This article comes over from Business Insider, written by Camilla DeChalis. Says inside the police reform rift between BLM activists and the Democrats 1 year after protests engulfed the nation. Police reform once brought in a beautiful harmony the Democratic lawmakers and the BLM activists together. Now they're pushing to pass a bipartisan bill. They've left out attempts to lobby lawmakers on both sides of the aisle. All right, so I want to go through this briefly just to frame out a little bit about sort of the evolution of this back and forth. So we know that BLM has been active in trying to get some real legislation passed. We know that the Democrats promised them the world that they were going to be involved and do all of this. But let's take a look at really how this is unfolding behind the scenes. Democratic lawmakers and BLM activists marched together last summer in the aftermath of the Floyd killing. That scene symbolized unity between the two sides. But a year later, activists who propelled the issue of police reform find themselves sidelined. Some BLM activists say that the White House and lawmakers within Congress have continued to shut them out of these negotiations. You don't say. Crime Bill Joe Biden and top cop Kamala Harris don't want to hear from BLM? No kidding. The Movement from Black Lives, a coalition of several organizations that advocates the rights of Black Americans, is one of many groups that have tried to reach out to lawmakers to hold conversations, but their calls have gone unanswered. A policy and research coordinator for the organization said. Political backlash. And where is this coming from? Could it have anything to do with defund the police? Leading the efforts to get a congressional police reform measure, we have two Democrats, Karen Bass of California and Cory Booker of New Jersey. Tim Scott, a South Carolina Republican, is also in the fray. The group acknowledged that they will not make the May 25th deadline, which was today. They need help to succeed. They need 50 Democrats and at least 10 Republicans to get the 60 vote threshold. Now, of course, that is true, right? Because you need a more than a simple majority if it is a non-financial bill. But of course, Joe Biden could defund the police with the stroke of a pen, or they could make this a financial bill. They could make this a budgetary bill, and then they only need a simple majority. So they could just sort of start defunding different states. They could use the power of the purse, which is within the purview of the House of Representatives, to control the budgets of different states and just say, hey, if you don't, reduce your police force by 25%, we're going to pull back this federal funding. That happened like that, no problem. And they have all of the House of Representatives that they need to do that. So what they're going to be doing now for the foreseeable future is blaming the Republicans. Well, they're not coming across the aisle. We have 51 Democrats, but we need 9 Republicans, and they're not going to cross because of that damn qualified immunity thing. All right, Democrats, then table that. Table the qualified immunity. Let's get everything else that you've promised. And I don't even agree with all the solutions. I just say, if you promise this stuff, get it through. Okay. And if you're going to be bloviating about this and justice reform all the time on all, and be parading Floyd's family around all over the place, well, let's see some action from you, shall we? We'll see if they do it. So they're going to be blaming the Republicans for the foreseeable future, even though they have other mechanisms by which they could get something done. During a CNN interview, James Clyburn, a Democrat for South Carolina who's been an ardent supporter for police reform, suggested that the final bipartisan measure did not have to include reforms on qualified immunity. We know what that is. Other elements in the bill are being debated, like the federal banning of chokeholds, requiring police officers to wear body cameras. So chokeholds, I disagree with. I think chokeholds absolutely have to be necessary. If you don't have a chokehold, folks, if you've never wrestled or done mixed martial arts, if you can't subdue somebody with the chokehold, the only other alternative is to basically kill them. Hit them in the head, knock them unconscious, cause a concussion, cause a laceration, cause a brain bleed, or shoot them or tase them or something like that, right? A chokehold, if done appropriately, perfectly safe and acceptable. The response to that would be, let's not have cops use less than lethal force and require them to use a gun. Let's just train them how to use the less than lethal force better. Many activists fear that, on body cameras though, absolutely, that should be without question. Many activists fear that the bill lawmakers are considering is watered down, not a true reflection of what activists want. They say it's been a missed opportunity on the part of folks in the government to not engage very deeply at the grassroots level, said Maurice Mitchell. Clyburn said that he did not know exactly whom Bass has been consulting with on this measure outside of congressional lawmakers, but said she and others should talk with everybody who has knowledge about the subject. The White House, as well as Bass, Scott, and Booker, did not respond to the request for a comment. So you're seeing a lot of the BLM people sort of being kicked out of the conversation. And really for good reason. I mean, truthfully, what BLM wants is insane. Here is a list of demands from their website. So they want to convict and ban Donald Trump from political future. So you have a couple people who are on board with this idea. You got Rep. Ilhan Omar, Presley, Cory Bush, Jamal Bowman, that they're all for this. So they want to convict and ban Donald Trump. So if you're sort of a mainstream Democrat and you're going, well, we can't do that. Okay. We tried to convict him in the House of Representatives. We got that done. We tried to convict him in the Senate. We didn't convict him. We impeached him. Basically, we indicted him in the House, but we couldn't convict him in the Senate. We tried twice. Can't do it. So do you have any other demands? What else do you want from us, folks? We can't do this. So stop asking. Number two, though, maybe they want to talk about justice reform. So the first one had to do with Trump. Maybe number two will have to do with justice. Oh no, it says expel Republican members of Congress. Okay, so so nothing to do with law enforcement, nothing to do with anything other than a white supremacist attack on the insurrection. So BLM. If it's a justice reform organization, they're 0 for 2. Then we have launch a full investigation into the ties between white supremacy and the Capitol Police and law enforcement and the military. So it sounds like they want to sort of fund the police to do an investigation, like law enforcement officials to go in and investigate what happened there. So this is also a refund the police type of idea here. So they're 0 for 3 now on justice reform. Then they want to permanently ban Trump from all digital media platforms. So how are they going to do that? Do they have a phone call into Zuckerberg and Dorsey and all of those other people? So we're 0 for 4 now. Defund the police. There it is. So when we finally get to something that relates to justice reform, they just want to go ahead and just defund the entire police. We don't want any more of them at all. So if you're a Democratic lawmaker and you're trying to negotiate in this country about a reasonable justice reform solution, what are you supposed to do with that? Why would you even invite them to the table? You can't, because it's ridiculous. Don't let the coup be used as an excuse to crack down on our movement. So I don't even know what they want. Like, I don't know how you deliver that. Like, do we deliver one promise of no coup? All right. And then they want to pass the Breathe Act. So not even talking about the George Floyd Act. They're talking about the Breathe Act. Police were born out of slave patrols, they say. We cannot reform an institution built upon white supremacy. The Breathe Act wants racial equity screens in federal programs. We want environmental justice at historic levels, engaging with system-impacted communities, health justice, education justice, housing justice, and environmental justice. So nothing at all other than defunding the police to do with justice. I'm sorry, criminal justice, which is what we were talking about with George Floyd. And police, that was criminal justice. That was not environmental justice. Now, the New York Times, for some reason, is confused as to why people are sort of tired of BLM. How could that be? What's the problem? What's going on here? And this story comes over from redstate.com, which is a red blog written over by Nick Arama. It says the New York Times has an opinion piece out. It says support for Black Lives Matter surged last year. Did it last? They say they note how immediately after the death of George Floyd, that support for BLM surged. But then, as we noticed here, after June 3rd, it took a precipitous drop. As the summer went on, it went down even further than before. The article said that among some voters, even Republicans, it turned out into outright opposition. Damn it, BLM. Damn it. See what we told you? The article suggests this drop is evidence of support from white people and Republicans being fickle. They never seem to figure out why it took such a drop after June 3rd, just suggesting that people don't like it when protesters seek a redress of grievances, or implying that Republicans and non-supportive voters have issues with civil rights. Right? Do you think it's that? If you're listening and you're sort of not a fan of BLM, is it because you have a problem with civil rights? You got an issue with that? Do you have a problem when people redress their grievances with their government? Is that offensive to you? Me neither. Nobody cares about those things. The New York Times opinion piece says after Floyd's death, Republicans reported much stronger support for BLM than they had earlier in 2020. But perhaps more striking is the rapid decline. Look at these numbers. Net support versus January 1, 2020. So we see something happen right here. What's going on here? I don't know what that is. But we see Democrats maintain support. All voters are just trending off, going down. Republicans, just a rapid drop off. Just, nope, that's enough. Nope, we've had enough. Thanks for playing. Up until this moment, even the Republicans, what they saw on that video, they said, all right, this is insane. We want to address this issue. Then something happened. Nope, we're up. Thanks for playing. Not around anymore. Wonder why they didn't show this graph from the same article. Hispanic or Latino, we have a new addition. That's also dropping off. Oh, and we also have this one from the African American community, also dropping off. And we have other also dropping off. They're all going down. Okay, it's not just Republicans. It's all demographics, all ethnicities. Everybody is bailing ship, abandoning ship. What they completely leave out and never mention is the riots, the assaults, the killings, the destruction that occurred over the past year in connection with the protests. You think that might have had a little bit to do with the drop after June 3rd? How do you write about the decline and never touch upon that? Then came the radical calls to defund the police, which virtually no one but Democrats supported. When the decline showed that, yes, BLM, Black Lives Matter to people, which was why there was a brief moment of unity. But then people of all stripes rejected the violence and the radical nature of BLM. Okay, so you have small letter BLM and you have capital letter BLM. One says, yes, Black Lives Matter, of course. The other is this neo-Marxist anti-justice movement that just enriches their founders with new houses. But of course, the New York Times wanted to suggest it was uncaring white people and Republicans without leaving out all the destruction. The article notes that white Democrats were still supporting BLM, which they take as a positive movement. So they're basically confirming the Democrats are ignorant, is what he said. Or went on, or they're cool with the destruction if they agree with the radical nature. It said it's true. Democrats like Biden and Kamala embraced BLM. Kamala even donated to a bail fund during the riots. Remember that? She posted that up. Same day in Minneapolis after they torched the 3rd police precinct there, burnt it to the ground. She's up on Twitter. Kamala Harris on Twitter. Hey, anybody who is arrested there, just go to this website and you can support their bail fund. So that's nice that she really supports justice out there. Does she support bail reform? Wonder if she donated any money to those Capitol Hill rioters or not. Guessing not. New York Times doesn't believe that the opposition to BLM is likely to reverse anytime soon. Right, of course not. So on Twitter, somebody said, I wonder maybe this could be what caused it. Could it be pictures like this? Torching an Arby's? Is this justice? Maybe that might be why those numbers drop off, because people are tired of seeing their neighborhoods torched. It's not okay. People don't want to see cops killing people. They also don't want to see their neighborhoods torched. So if they want to work on their public image, a little bit of a suggestion to stop torching neighborhoods might be a good idea. Now, you know, the problem might be more fundamental than this. It might be something that starts at the top. You know, they say leadership starts at the top. You sort of set the culture at the top, and you want those people to be very strong natured, very powerful people who are going to move the needle on whatever you're working on. And the BLM the BLM founder actually says that police are a terrorist organization. So says she always wanted to fight them. So the remarks came over from a speech at King's College in London, part of a Ferguson Solidarity Tour. Colors, who is the BLM founder, reveals that her activism is rooted in a lifelong desire to, quote, fight the police, conflates the group to a terrorist organization. And I'm a criminal defense lawyer, okay? My job is to go and sort of work against the police. So I've got, sort of spring-loaded to say that there are problems with the police. I would never call them a terrorist organization. What? What? A terrorist organization? Like, I joined when I was 17, she said. I remember the first thing I said, do you fight the police? That's what I wanted to do. I always knew I wanted to fight police. They were the single most sort of terrorist organization in my life, and I wanted to know how to fight them. I am a person who fights the police, but I do not consider them a terrorist organization. I consider them to be a legitimate function of society. They need to be counterbalanced properly by a strong defense. We have the scales of justice. But I don't, when I walk into court and there's a police officer on the stand, I don't think that that's Al-Qaeda going to blow up the building. It's just a police officer. He's doing his job. And 99% of them are great people. So I started doing work when I was 17 years old against the police, she adds, before detailing how she ran campaigns that focused on trying to get them out of high schools. Ran campaigns that focused on decriminalizing young people's lives. So I can get behind that. That's fine. Colors also conflates police to terrorists when describing the motives of BLM. alleging her group seeks to combat the impact that terrorism, and I say terrorism, I'm talking about the police, has on our lives. So, this is just this is just a quick point here, but it's like, how do you engage in a real dialogue with this person? How do you have a conversation if this is how this person thinks? And doesn't just like, this is not a new position. This person has been thinking this since she was 17 years old. Her entire framework for how law enforcement works in America is sort of a victim population versus a terrorist organization. And she's confirmed that twice now, 2 sentences. Actually, three times in 2 sentences, twice in the same sentence. So if you're on the side of let's have a reasonable conversation about law enforcement in America, and you're trying to have on the other side of the table a conversation with somebody that says the police are actual terrorists, what do you do? Do you have that conversation? No, you get up and leave. You just say, we're done. We're done here. Go ahead, continue your work on fighting terrorism in America, and I'll do my work. Thanks for playing. I'm out. During the event, which was hosted by student groups including Action Palestine, the Intersectional Feminist Society, the African Caribbean Society, and the King's Ethnic Minority Association. Oh my gosh. That is just one of the most perfect sentences I've ever read on this show. We have Action Palestine. We have the Intersectional Feminist Society. We have the African Caribbean Society. Then we have the King's Ethnic Minority Association, along with Black Lives Matter. Oh my goodness. In response to the Ferguson riots, Colors recounted how it prompted many of us to go back into our own neighborhoods and shut shit down, she said. One of the biggest things I learned about Ferguson is does not take 2,000 people to shut stuff down. 5 people can shut a freeway down. We did it in LA. 10 people can shut a Walmart down. We did it in Ferguson. She also talks about occupying the LAPD headquarters. She said, we've been shutting S down since August 9th. We're still shutting it down. In LA, for example, we occupied Los Angeles Police Headquarters for 18 days. They occupied the Los Angeles Police Headquarters 18 days. Was that an insurrection? Did I miss that one? Because it sounds like they're interfering with formal government operations. I mean, the police are an extension of the government. It's a government entity. And they're they occupied the headquarters for 18 days. Did you hear about this? I didn't hear about this. I wonder where all the impeachment articles are. Are they being drafted by Nancy Pelosi and her crew? Doubtful. This unearthed video that follows, we're going to play this next, shows Colors relishing people comparing her work for its similarities to former Chinese Communist Party Mao Zedong, his little red books in a 2010 speech. Quote, I was speaking to this young person from Arizona who's trying to fight SB 1070, which was that immigration bill we had here, and he grabbed a book and he said, it's like Mao's red book. And I was like, man, that's what I was thinking. And it was just really cool to hear him make that connection. And I was like, how about you buy 10 to 15 of these books and you'll have all like a youth organizing group where you talk about it and you really try to engage this. The BLM co-founder commented. Here she is.
I joined the organization when I was 17 years old. And I remember the first thing I said to the organization was, do you fight police? That's what I wanted to do. I always knew I wanted to fight the police. They were the single most sort of terrorist organization in my life, and I wanted to know how to fight them. I wanted to know how to hold them accountable. So I started doing work when I was 17 years old against the police. And from there, did different sorts of things, ran campaigns that focused on trying to get them out of high schools, ran campaigns that focused on decriminalizing young people's lives.
All right, take a look up here. You can see this says no more deaths up here, no more cover-ups, no more something. So we have all of the organizations. We have the Action Palestine. We saw those all listed there. So got a nice little setup here. I mean, this is a big production. They're going to be recording this and making a documentary out of it or something. So, all right, let's take some questions over from watchingthewatchers.locals.com. We got Joe Snow first up, says, blaming Republicans? Now, that's a novel idea. Yeah, they are definitely doing that. Going to milk that one for a while. NY Renal MD says, I think qualified immunity needs an overhaul. We have legal tests for causes of action, slander, libel. Make a legal test so it's at least possible to file a lawsuit. I agree. So I actually agree with that. I think that qualified immunity absolutely does need to be addressed. My only sort of rub here is that if we're going to make that the basis or the crux of an entire criminal justice bill, there's still a lot of other things we can do. So it's all right. If the whole thing is going to fail, Meaning we just had one of the most monumental criminal justice cases that we may have in our lifetimes. I mean, truthfully, what happened with George Floyd and the response there, it's kind of a once in a century thing, right? Have we ever had anything like that before? Not quite to that extent. We've had Rodney King, we had OJ, of course, we've had the Zimmermans and all of those, but not quite anything, I think, at this scale. So something like this happens, and we have all of the momentum to pass something meaningful, and we're just going to stop because qualified immunity? That's it? You got the basis, or at least a good argument for the basis as to why the Democrats got elected in the first place was because it was sort of in the throes of all this social unrest and racial impropriety or disparities that are happening around the country. So if the Democrats now take control of the White House, the Senate, and the House of Representatives, and they don't get anything done, and they just go, oh, well, those Republicans, we wanted qualified immunity in there, but they wouldn't give it to us. So we're going to blame them for stalling the entire package. It's their fault. Give me a break. So you just say, all right, well, we're going to give that up. We're going to pass all of this other stuff, the stuff that we have been promising to our constituents for a long time. We'll see if that happens, though. I'm not holding my breath. Renal says, I think there is public support for some of the qualified immunity reform. Democrats are likely riding on the controversy. Yeah, peace, tranquility is not the environment where they thrive politically. Right. Exactly right. This is a great point. So what happens if the Democrats pass all of this stuff? And what happens if something else happens down the road? What are they going to complain about? What are they going to be able to do? Because if the Democrats pass something here, then they're going to own it for the foreseeable future. So they kind of really don't have much interest in that, because if they solve this issue, well, they deflate a lot of the momentum in the sales that's behind them at the current moment. I know that's very cynical, but I think it's true. Chokeholds matter. Working security in downtown Chicago to help pay for school. Chokeholds help me keep peace on more than a dozen occasions. Yeah, that comes from It's Ed. He's right. Right? It is right. So chokeholds are important. I mean, the other thing you can do is just bash somebody over the head or shoot them, I guess. We have Joe Snow says, you must have never had to tell a cop no. Don't know what that is in reference to. I mean, I've told cops no a lot, but in the context of the law, I can't say that I've ever been pulled over and a cop gave me an order and I said no. But of course, I would not have a problem with that if it was an unlawful order. But I know that other people may not have that same, perspective, right? And so that's why we're going to be talking about how to talk to cops on Saturday, June 12th. If you're a subscriber at watchingthewatchers.locals.com, you're going to get to be a part of that. And then Joe Snow, we're going to talk about how to talk to the cops. Sharon Quidney says they are not interested in a conversation. All they are interested in is replacing the Constitution, which they advertise as racist, with a totalitarian Marxist dictatorship. I think they're on the right track there, Sharon. Jeremy says anyone with half a brain can define the verb to police. Even if you define one who enforces law is not a terrorist by definition. Ignorance of reality only makes one appear crazy. These people are claiming to be combating terrorism, but are terrorists themselves by definition. Ooh, that's good. I like that, Jeremy. Well done. We have another one from Joe Snow says, to be honest, I don't entirely disagree that today's police absolutely terrorize people for sport. I don't consider them a terrorist organization, but many individual officers are terrorists because they truly are some of the most disgusting sociopaths walking among us. I've dealt with many cops growing up. One or two were decent people. One was stellar. All the rest were absolutely predators who take joy in ruining lives. It's an interesting perspective. And, to be fair to that point, right, there are officers who do terrorize people. There's no question about that. I think some of it is justified. Okay. If you're sort of in a situation where allegedly you're breaking the law and you need somebody to say you're breaking the law. So there's a boundary that's being crossed. Anytime you cross any boundary, you're going to have some friction there. And especially when you're talking about laws in society, you're sort of breaching something. You're going to have police. When you meet in the middle there, it's going to be contentious. And if you're not somebody that's familiar with dealing with police, it's going to feel like you're being terrorized. And some of those situations, even though that the person, sort of the defendant or the person who's being charged with the crime, even though they may feel subjectively terrorized, that feeling alone does not make what the police did unreasonable or unlawful or even wrong in any capacity. As long as they're following the rules, as long as they're following the laws, the fact that somebody feels terrorized, that's part of the deal. Okay, that's just part of society. Now, there are other situations, of course, and I've dealt with many of them, where the police have no lawful authority or are exceeding their lawful authority, and they're becoming inhumane to certain people outside of the context of what should be allowed. And I think that in those cases, of course, those are those bad cops I talk about. And I'm very upset with those cops. I started an entire YouTube channel about it. And I like to call those officers out and make sure that they're held accountable. But just because that there is, one bucket of those people, it doesn't necessarily mean that all the officers are bad. I think that, there's sort of a cultural problem with law enforcement where a lot of the good officers are not encouraged or given a forum where they can speak up and call out some of the problems that they see. And so when I talk about law enforcement in that context, I think that there is a cultural problem that permeates the entire sector. That being said, I still believe that within that shell, that most of the officers in there, at least in my experience, I've dealt with many of them, I think that they're mostly good people. Not generally friendly, okay? They don't typically like to see me. We don't go out and shake hands and say hi, but reasonable people that I can tell are doing their best, doing a job. They've got other things going on in their lives, just like you do, just like I do. And they're just trying to do a good job. And, they don't necessarily like to go in and sort of get beat up by a defense attorney. And we don't like to do that either. So it's just one of the things that, we're all human beings. We have all sorts of different permutations about what makes us human. And we're trying to negotiate and reach a consensus in the middle that is reasonable. So when I think that when we go too far one direction either way, we can get a little bit blinded by our own cognitive biases. And I recognize that myself, I am generally on that side. I'm like over here going, these damn cops and these damn prosecutors, and I can recognize that in myself, but I also recognize that there's a bit of a blind spot. And so I try to kind of pull myself back in over here and be empathetic to police, many of whom I think are just trying to do their best out there. So thank you for the perspective, Joe Snow. Appreciate your comments. Thanks for being here. And that's it for that segment. We're going to wrap up. We're going to keep talking about Floyd in a little bit of a different context. Back last year, after George Floyd was killed, we know that the entire country was up in arms about it, and many people were demanding action and change, including many CEOs and corporations. Now that a year has passed, the question is, did they make good on their promises? Did all of those pledges come to fruition? We're going to take a look at an article from the Financial Times that says, are CEOs living up to the pledges they made after George Floyd's murder? Promises were made about diversity and about racial justice. Well, those are proved easier to make than they are to keep. Isn't that convenient? So here's another picture of George Floyd. This article was written by Andrew Edgecliffe Johnson and Taylor Nichols Rogers down here from the Financial Times. Go give them a subscription if you like the content. The words systemic racism used to not be spoken on U.S. companies' earnings calls. Okay, so think about this. You work at a private corporation or a public corporation or a private business or whatever. The way that we're talking about interfacing with other people has changed dramatically. I'm going to talk to you here about a couple different charts. Sort of what is the consequence of everything that we went through the last year in our corporate worlds? We talked about this in the context of criminal law. We talked about this in the context of justice reform and our useless politicians. Now we're talking about this in terms of society. And how is this all trickling down into our culture and into our daily lives, even in our workplaces? We've seen a lot of this stuff come to fruition in this context, talking about diversity. The murder of George Floyd, a black man killed by Chauvin, abruptly changed that, putting the phrase into the mouths of the country's top executives and forcing them to consider their part in a system they're now denouncing. We have Apple's Tim Cook. We have Dave Solomon of Goldman Sachs. They declared that business leaders need not only speak up, but they need to do more to address racial disparities in their own companies. An assessment of the changes they have made in the intervening period suggests that Floyd's death did catalyze corporate diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, but on several key measures, much more needs to be done, including to turn executives' newly active rhetoric into a reality. American corporations, they pledged to spend $50 billion on racial equity. And you remember this, right? Remember, we've seen sort of a slow transition here. We saw a lot of this start with Colin Kaepernick. Then we saw Nike sort of go all in on that message. We've seen Coca-Cola. People were joking. They're called Woca-Cola. And sort of the list goes on and on. You see boycotts and you see a lot of corporations sort of jumping into the political fray, leaving many of us to go, All right, we're going to get political now with the corporations. We're going to see how that works. But $50 billion is a significant amount of money. The funds were to be spread between donations to civil rights organizations and targeted investments in communities of color and overhauls of their internal recruiting and training programs. Yet only about $250 million has actually been spent or committed. $250 million out of $50 billion. Okay. Tiny little fraction. $50 billion is a lot of money. This is what the vocabulary looks like. This is what happened. Remember, this happened May 25th, right about this time. George Floyd changed how corporate America speaks, changed the vocabulary. Mentions of systemic racism and Black Lives Matter at company events. This is what happened. This is the pink here is BLM. So as soon as George Floyd died, major spike. And it's been flowing ever since. Same here with systemic racism. Boom. All over the place. Spiking up, still around and in existence. Now, the question is, is this doing much of anything? Is this just a bunch of people just talking about making some meaningful changes, about creating some equity or equality? Or is this just a bunch of bloviating from corporate shills, as is usually the case? Well, we know that employers are happy talking about some things, but not other things. Let's see if we can dissect why that might be. So from this same article, it says that employers are happier disclosing anti-bias training than they are about pay. So if they're talking about, we've got a very unequal society in America. We're all a bunch of racist white patriarchs that were emerged from original sin, tainted by the stink of slavery back in the 1600s when America started to get its feet under herself. So how do we correct that problem? I'm a Fortune 500 CEO. I know what a piece of garbage I am. I got to fix the scales in America. What do I do? Well, I can do one thing. I can just give everybody raises. I can just say, well, we've been pretty racist here at this country for the last 50 years. So we're going to just go ahead and give some version of reparations or something. We're going to give the plighted people benefits in the forms of monetary compensation. It's one way to do it, right? And these corporations could do that. Do they want to do that? No, of course not. They don't want to do any of that. They want to talk about education and training programs. Okay. So employers are happier disclosing anti-bias training plans than they are pay. No, they don't want to talk about pay equity. That's down here at the bottom. Nobody wants to talk about that. But we can talk about education and training programs. We can talk about community investments because, well, first of all, we know that we're not going to have to make any of those. We pledged $50 billion. We only gave $250 million. So you're all a bunch of suckers who printed that. So we're just going to say this a lot, and we know that we're only going to have to deliver about this much of it. Then we've got racial and ethnic diversity data. So that's easy for them. They just go to their HR department and we just run some numbers. We got some low numbers over here, so we're going to beef that up. So that causes, really, they don't have to do anything about that. Then a response to mass incarceration. So what are these companies going to do about any of that? Nothing. They're just going to kick it over to the politicians who are also not going to do anything about it. And so they can just talk about this all day long. So most of these are actually just totally meaningless. They don't do anything, but they can talk about it and they can pledge a bunch of money and they can sort of cause some incensed division in this country by puffing up a bunch of politically volatile stories that make them sort of feel good about themselves without actually doing anything meaningful to rectify some of the imbalances that they're claiming exist. Now, I'm not buying any of their premises. I don't believe the premises, but they're their premises. I mean, they're the people who came out and said this. Well, we're going to commit $50 billion to solving racial disparity in this country. Okay, well, where is your money? Well, it's a good question. What we want to focus on is education and training programs. Oh, okay. And community investments. Got it. Good for you. It's a nice grift. Very, very nice grift. A few of these platforms have used their power more forcefully. We have an economist who's the director of 3M and Chevron. So she said, we are demanding much more responsibility and accountability around subcontractors. So she said the companies she works for were scrutinizing whether accountants, law firms, and headhunters were sufficiently diverse. Listen to this. This is great. Coca-Cola went public with a demand in January. They told U.S. law firms that they must commit within 18 months to having at least 30% of their billable hours be from diverse attorneys, half of whom must be black. So Coca-Cola calls up our law firm and says, hey guys, well, we don't want you working on our stuff anymore unless a third of your office is black. So, I'm not going to share with you the demographics of our firm, of course, but if we didn't have that, or if we needed to get that, then what would we do? I guess we would just fire some white people and go find some black people so that we could keep a client called Coca-Cola if they were our client. Like, is that what they're asking law firms to do? Go fire the white folks at your firm. Go hire some black people because we're not going to do business with you unless you do that. Okay, that's Coke. If they want to do that, I guess they're entitled. That sounds racist as hell to me, but what do I know? On current trends, black lawyers could not expect to be equitably represented among law firm partners until 2391, said Coke's general counsel at the time. So they're going to fix that. He said, we have developed scorecards. We've held summits. We've established committees. We've written action plans. These efforts are not working. Weeks after sending the letter, and just 8 months into his job, however, Gayton had stepped back into a consulting role. Poor idiot. He has no idea what he's doing. Asked whether Gayton's diversity demand remained in place, the company said only that his successor would take time to thoughtfully review its initiatives. So the guy sends this letter to a bunch of law firms, and you have a bunch of lawyers go, oh, that sounds like discrimination to me. Sounds like that might be a violation of the equal protection rules under the Employment Discrimination Act. And you've got all these employment lawyers going, oh, this will be fun. So not a good decision to sort of send a racist request to a bunch of law firms that have a bunch of lawyers who know how the law works. Not going to work out for you when you do that. So that guy got promoted and went right back down to a consultant. Thanks for the consultation. We're not going to be needing any more of that. So it's just, oh my gosh, which is kind of why I have so much fun with this topic. It's like, it's such a ridiculous thing. These people who think this way and operate this way and try to act this way, it doesn't work. They're going to run themselves into different circles and they're just going to explode under the weight of their own idiocy. It's like a black hole collapsing in on itself. There's just so much bad idea happening in one vicinity. It's just going to collapse into itself, which is fine. It means we just have to sit here and watch as this whole thing crumbles before our very eyes. Now, we also know that the feds are trying to get involved in some of this as well. So we're talking about corporations like Coke and the NFL and the NBA and all of these big major organizations. But our federal government now is also kind of inserting our money into this conversation. Very strange. We see this article here published over from Fox News. Fox Business says that the wokeness at the Fed's regional banks puts central bank independence at risk. So what does wokeness and racial justice and any of this stuff have to do with the Federal Reserve banks? Well, regional banks are taking an increasingly alarming stance on politically charged issues like racial justice, according to Senator Pat Toomey, a Republican from Pennsylvania. Federal Reserve banks in Atlanta, Boston, Minneapolis recently dedicated resources to social policy, reflecting the political leanings of officials who are neither elected nor confirmed by the Senate. Federal Reserve's mission statement mandates that the central bank to achieve maximum employment and stable prices. Experience has shown that countries with independent banks achieve better outcomes, Pursuing a highly politicized social agenda unrelated to monetary policy is inflicting reputational damage on the banks, said Senator Toomey. 3 banks recently spearheaded a series that will be participated in by all 12 regional banks, which is centered on the belief that racism forms the foundation of inequality in our society. The Racism and Economy series highlighted a number of topics, including structural racism in housing, education, and labor markets. Atlanta Fed president, who is the first black Fed president, on Monday said that should he become Fed chairman, he would steer the central bank towards economic inclusivity and equity. Can you believe this? The Federal Reserve chairman is going to push the Federal Reserve Bank towards economic inclusivity and equity. Folks, that is code word for like Marxism, exactly right there, which is scary. Earlier this year, he said that there are definitely merits to reparations, and called the changes to Georgia voting laws troubling. That came last year after he published a letter said a moral and economic imperative to end racism. So this guy is just a stone's throw away from the Fed chair. Minneapolis Fed, meanwhile, in 2020 renewed its commitment to dismantling systemic racism. said that the deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor were the racist roots of the country. Toomey asked all three banks to provide documents on their recent racial justice activism. Good for him. Good for Senator Toomey for getting that stuff. Says it falls outside their scope no later than June 7th. Good for him. Hats off to Senator Toomey. They said, we received an inquiry from Toomey's office about better understanding how we are using racial inequality with the Federal Reserve. Spokesman for both of them declined to comment. The politicization of this and the so-called wokeism has been seeping into governmental departments, corporate boardrooms, and universities across America as Biden pushes the plan to combat systemic racism, which is a stain on our nation's soul, he says. Biden later said he doesn't think that American people are racist. That's good. White House has said that the White House has not said if Biden would sign a reparations bill should one pass through Congress. Well, maybe somebody should ask him, would you sign that, Joe? Yes or no? We got to move quickly through these questions. Doctor says recently senators presented amendments to put baseball's antitrust status with the federal government. MLB claimed that Georgia's legislation clearing up the voting laws after 2020 was racist. Since these corporations are political now, they should no longer enjoy special treatment. I agree with that. If they're going to be political, we should treat them the same way as we do all political organizations. Sharon Quinney says, in all this talk about BLM, racial equity, trying to outwoke each other, the corporations are just taking out a form of insurance against vandalism and future repercussions in the event of a Marxist takeover. We have Nadar Blasier says, you know what is even more worthless than paying for all these woke programs? Carbon credits. These things are the biggest con on the planet once you look into it for more than 5 minutes. Yeah, there's a lot of that going on. So the feds are now getting involved in this wokeism game, which means it might be a good idea to just kind of maybe think about some alternative currencies, which, by the way, I have a new crypto channel, which is down below. Let's take a quick look at the freedom markets. These are the freedom indices because there's no wokeness going on here. Bitcoin is kind of hovering around 37,000. We've got Ethereum's about 2,600. No real major changes. You can see still on an uptrend really in all of these markets. We've got the Cardano is looking pretty good, $1.59 right now. We have Solana is doing well also. That's about $30. This has been trending down all day. So, you know, that might be worth taking a look at. We have ICP, which I just made a video about this one down here. So ICP, very interesting protocol. I made a video on the crypto channel about this protocol specifically. This is supposed to replace the entire internet at some point in the future. And it looks like we got a little bit of a upswing right there. We got Dogecoin is in the house. That is still falling. We've got Shiba Inu, which is another meme coin. And then we have Litecoin, which is a staple. So, you know, if the Fed is going to be going woke, there are other ways where you can spend your time that don't involve woke American dollars. Put them in crypto. And all those questions came over from watchingthewatchers.locals.com. You can see this here. Welcome to Lonnie Holcomb. Welcome to the community, my friend. I'm glad that you are here and with us. And if you are not already a part of the community, you can join up and you can get a copy of my book for free. It's called Beginning to Winning: How to Fight Your Case and Succeed in the Criminal Justice System. You can also download a copy of the slides that we went through today, a copy of my impeachment party documents, download my personal productivity system called Existence Systems. We share links throughout the day and you meet a lot of great people. We met a lot of great people on our last monthly Zoom meetup. We had about 35 people on. Super fun. Want to show you when our next one is. We had our last one on May 22nd, which was last weekend. Next one's coming up June 26th. If you're a member at watchingthewatchers.locals.com, you get in on that for free, no charge. You also get the chance, or it's free. Just need you to come to it. It's on Saturday, June 12th. We're doing law enforcement interaction training. So we're going to spend about an hour and a half talking about how this all works, and then we'll take some questions and just kind of hang out for the last half hour. We're going to spend 2 hours Saturday morning for me, 9 a.m., 12 p.m., or 12 noon Eastern time for those of you on the East Coast. And one last thing, I happen to be a criminal defense lawyer in Scottsdale, Arizona. And so if you know anybody in the state of Arizona who has been charged with a crime, we would be honored and humbled if you sent them our direction. We offer free case evaluations. We can help with any type of criminal charge, even traffic charges. We can help with any time that you're in trouble with the law. We are the people to call. And so we would really appreciate your referrals and any love that you send our way. All of the contact information is down in the link in the description below. Quick reminder, if you're watching this and you're not subscribed to this channel, go ahead and subscribe. We would love to see you here back on future shows. I have a list of some of the other channels where some of my other content content is now coming out. So if you're interested in that, I'd encourage you to go check those out as well. As many of you know, YouTube has not been nice to us on this channel. And so we're sort of diversifying a little bit and segmenting the content out. So if you want to follow along, that's the place to do that. And then that is it, my friends. We're going to be back here same time, same place tomorrow, 4 p.m. Arizona time, 5 p.m. Mountain, 6 p.m. Central, 7 p.m. on the East Coast for that one Florida man. Everybody have a tremendously lovely evening. Sleep very well. I'll see you here tomorrow. Bye-bye.